In 1933, 1 in 4 Americans had no job and no money. A doctor visit cost $2, 2 days' wages for those lucky enough to have work. Families healed themselves, or they did not. Number 18 on this list cost nothing and outperformed the prescription antifungal that replaced it. Number 7 is now sold in health stores for $22 a bottle. Your grandmother made it in a mason jar for free. These are 25 Depression-era cures poor American families used when they could not afford a doctor. Number 25. Kerosene. This one will stop you cold. During the Great Depression, families too poor to afford antiseptics reached for the kerosene lamp and used what was in it. A cut that turned red and hot, the first sign of infection moving toward the blood, got a soaking of kerosene poured directly onto the wound. Children screamed. The burning was intense and immediate, but the infection stopped. Kerosene is a petroleum distillate with genuine broad-spectrum antimicrobial properties. A 2009 review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology documented kerosene's traditional use as a wound antiseptic across multiple cultures and confirmed its antimicrobial activity against common wound pathogens. Families who could not afford iodine, which cost 5 cents a bottle in 1933, real money for a family on 30 cents a day, used what they had. It worked well enough that the knowledge survived the Depression and was still being practiced in rural communities in the 1960s. Number 24. Whorehound candy. When whooping cough swept through a Depression-era neighborhood and a family had no money for the doctor or the drugstore, mothers made whorehound candy. They simmered a handful of dried whorehound leaves in molasses for 20 minutes, poured the dark liquid into a shallow greased pan, and let it harden into brittle candy that broke into chunks. A piece slipped into a sick child's cheek eased the racking cough within minutes. A pound of molasses cost 8 cents in 1933. One batch lasted a family through the worst of winter. Commercial whorehound drops sold for a penny a piece at the general store, but the homemade kind worked better because the leaves were fresh dried. The FDA quietly removed whorehound from the approved list of cough medicine ingredients in 1989. Not because it failed, but because it could not compete commercially with the synthetic suppressants being marketed. Herbalists who kept the tradition going insist it still outperforms most drugstore cough syrups. Number 23. Onion poultice. Onions cost almost nothing even during the worst years of the Depression, and they were in every kitchen that had food at all. When pneumonia threatened and a doctor was out of reach, Depression-era mothers cut onions into thick slices, wrapped them in a cloth, heated the bundle over the stove until it steamed, and strapped it to the sick person's chest with a strip of torn sheet. Left overnight, it drew congestion out of the lungs and reduced the fever that came with it. The smell was overpowering. No one cared. Onions contain quercetin and allicin, compounds with confirmed anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. A study in 2010 in the journal Phytotherapy Research documented quercetin's significant expectorant and bronchodilatory effects. The science explains what Depression-era mothers observed firsthand. When your child could not breathe and you had no money, you used what was in the kitchen and you paid attention to what worked. A bottle of apple cider vinegar cost 3 cents in 1933, and it did more work in a Depression-era household than almost anything else on the shelf. For fever, mothers soaked cloths in equal parts vinegar and cool water and wrapped them around the ankles and forehead of the sick child. The fever came down within the hour. The mechanism is straightforward. Evaporative cooling works faster when the skin surface has slightly enhanced conductance from the mild acidity of the vinegar. Depression families also gave diluted apple cider vinegar internally for sore throats, digestive complaints, and the fatigue that came from months of inadequate nutrition. Research published in the journal Bioscience, Biotechnology, and Biochemistry in 2009 confirmed that acetic acid in apple cider vinegar significantly reduces blood glucose and improves insulin sensitivity. The Depression-era grandmother who gave it for general unwellness was working from a lifetime of observation. The laboratory eventually agreed with her. Number 21. Camphor Lard Chest Rub. Before Vicks VapoRub cost a dime, and families did not have dimes, Depression households made their own chest rub from lard and camphor crystals. Camphor was inexpensive and available at every drugstore and general store in America through the 1930s. Mixed into softened lard and rubbed onto the chest and back at bedtime, the combination opened congested airways and let a sick child sleep through the night. Camphor is a natural compound derived from the camphor laurel tree with confirmed decongestant and mild analgesic properties. It is still the active ingredient in Vicks VapoRub today, unchanged since the formula was created in 1905. The Depression families making their own camphor lard were using the identical active chemistry as the commercial product at roughly 1/20th the cost. A jar of camphor crystals cost 15 cents and made enough chest rub for an entire winter season. Number 20. Garlic for infection. In Depression-era households where antibiotics did not yet exist for civilian use, penicillin was not available commercially until 1945, and a wound that went septic was a genuine life-threatening emergency. Garlic was the answer families reached for first. Raw cloves were bruised and pressed directly against infected wounds. Garlic juice was rubbed onto infected skin. Children with ear infections had warm garlic oil dripped into the ear canal. Garlic broth was given internally for respiratory infections. A head of garlic cost 2 cents in 1935. It was available in every market in America, regardless of how poor the neighborhood. Allison, released when garlic is crushed, has confirmed broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity. A 2001 study in the journal Microbes and Infection confirmed direct antimicrobial activity against MRSA. For Depression-era families who could not afford the sulfa drugs that wealthy families used for infection in the late 1930s, garlic was not a folk remedy. It was the antibiotic. Number 19. Elderberry syrup. The 1918 influenza pandemic was still fresh in the memory of the grandmothers raising families during the Depression, and those grandmothers who had survived it remembered what helped. Elderberry syrup was made the same way their mothers had. Dark berries simmered with honey, bottled in mason jars, and stored in the cool of the cellar. 1 tablespoon every few hours at the first sign of fever or the bone ache that signaled the flu was coming on. Elder bushes grew along creek banks and fence lines across rural America, and they cost nothing to harvest. Modern research has confirmed that compounds in elderberry inhibit neuraminidase, the enzyme that flu viruses use to replicate and spread through the body. A 2004 study in the Journal of International Medical Research found elderberry extract reduced influenza duration by an average of 4 days. The Depression grandmother who kept elderberry syrup stocked through winter was not being superstitious. She was practicing antiviral medicine from a mason jar. Number 18. Cornmeal for fungal infections. Ringworm was a constant problem in Depression-era communities, highly contagious, uncomfortable, and in a cash economy where a tube of antifungal cream cost 25 cents, effectively untreatable for families living on nothing. The remedy that worked was cornmeal. A paste of cornmeal and water applied to the affected skin daily for 2 weeks. The ringworm cleared. Dermatologists who have studied this treatment found that cornmeal contains fatty acids, particularly linoleic acid, that create an environment hostile to trichophyton, the fungal genus responsible for ringworm in athlete's foot. A 2008 study published in the medical literature on plant-based antifungals confirmed cornmeal's antifungal properties against several dermatophyte species. A bag of cornmeal cost 9 cents in 1933 and served the family as food and medicine simultaneously. This is the remedy that cost nothing and outperformed the prescription antifungal treatment that eventually replaced it. Here is the number that puts everything on this list in context. In 1932, the worst year of the Great Depression, the average American family spent $1.08 on medical care for the entire year. Not per month, per year. The national average physician fee for an office visit was $2. For millions of families surviving on $10 or $15 a week, choosing between food and a doctor was not a moral failure. It was arithmetic. The remedies on this list were not ignorance. They were ingenuity under impossible circumstances. What the people who developed and used these treatments understood, and what pharmaceutical advertising of the post-war boom spent 2 decades erasing, was that effective medicine grew in gardens and creek banks and could be found without a prescription. The post-war prosperity that made doctors affordable also made plant medicine seem unnecessary. The knowledge faded. 17 more. Number 17. Turpentine for sore throat. This one is shocking to modern ears, but it was standard Depression-era home medicine in the American South and Appalachia. A single drop of turpentine on a teaspoon of sugar, swallowed quickly, was the standard treatment for a bad sore throat. Some families rubbed diluted turpentine on the chest for bronchitis. Turpentine is a distillate of pine resin containing alpha-pinene and beta-pinene, terpene compounds with confirmed antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. American physicians in the 19th century used turpentine preparations routinely for respiratory infection and had published clinical observations on its effectiveness long before Depression families were reaching for it. The practice of using it internally requires exact dosing, too much, and it causes kidney damage. Depression families who used it correctly in single drops were within a therapeutic range that produced real benefit. It was discontinued not because of widespread harm, but because it was unpleasant, uncontrollable in dose by most households, and eventually replaced by cheaper synthetic alternatives. Number 16. Plantain leaf, backyard wound remedy. The broad-ribbed weed in every Depression-era yard and alley was the family's free wound kit. Mothers chewed the leaf briefly to break the cells and release the compounds, then pressed the green mass directly on bee stings, infected splinters, and wounds that had started to go hot and swollen. The children called it the sting plant, the cure plant, the back of the yard thing. Depression families who could not afford a tube of antiseptic cream had plantain growing between the cracks in every sidewalk and at the edge of every vacant lot in America. Allantoin in plantain accelerates wound closure. It is the same compound in commercial wound creams that sell for $12 a tube today. Aucubin and bicoline in the leaf have confirmed antimicrobial activity. The difference between the Depression family and the modern consumer is $11.93. The plant is still there. It still works. Most people still pull it out of the yard and throw it away. Number 15. Baking soda. A box cost 3 cents in 1933, and in a Depression-era household, it was the most versatile substance in the cabinet. For heartburn and indigestion, a half teaspoon dissolved in water provided relief, faster and cheaper than any pharmacy preparation. For insect stings, a paste of baking soda and water on the skin drew out the venom's acid component and reduced the swelling within minutes. For urinary tract discomfort, it alkalinized the urine and reduced the burning that made walking difficult. For minor burns, a wet paste on the skin cooled the tissue and reduced inflammation. For tooth pain, it was mixed with salt and pressed against the gum. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. Its mechanism for each of these applications is chemically straightforward and scientifically confirmed. Families during the Depression who had discovered its versatility through observation were using a compound whose applications modern chemistry has validated one by one over the subsequent 80 years. Number 14. Castor oil. Every Depression-era parent administered castor oil, and every Depression-era child dreaded it. A tablespoon given at the first sign of constipation, stomach complaints, or what mothers called general sluggishness, moved the bowels reliably within hours and was considered the first-line treatment for any digestive complaint. Castor oil comes from the castor bean and contains ricinoleic acid, which binds to receptors in the intestinal wall, triggering peristalsis, the muscular contractions that move contents through the gut. It works through a completely legitimate pharmacological mechanism. A bottle of castor oil cost 15 cents in 1935 and served the entire family for months. Modern castor oil costs between $8 and $20 for the same bottle. Same compound, same mechanism. The Depression mother who administered it to a grimacing child was right about the pharmacology and wrong only about the flavor, which no amount of scientific validation has ever improved. Number 13. Comfrey. Working families in the Depression could not afford hospital visits for sprains, pulled muscles, or even fractures if the bones stayed aligned and the patient could be kept immobile. Comfrey grew in almost every kitchen garden and was the go-to poultice for musculoskeletal injuries. Mothers mashed the large, hairy leaves with a little lard, spread the paste thick over the injury, and wrapped it tight with strips torn from worn-out sheets. They changed the dressing daily for a week. Depression families called it knit bone because it seemed to knit injured tissue back together. The allantoin in comfrey stimulates cell proliferation and reduces inflammation, the same compound now in commercial wound preparations. A 2004 randomized controlled trial in phytomedicine found comfrey root extract significantly superior to diclofenac gel for ankle sprains. The family that wrapped a Depression-era sprained ankle in comfrey was administering a treatment that would outperform a standard pharmaceutical preparation in a clinical trial 70 years later. Number 12. Mustard plaster. No Depression-era remedy was more universally practiced or more effective for chest congestion than the mustard plaster. Dry mustard powder mixed with flour in a 2-to-1 ratio, combined with water to form a stiff paste, spread on a cloth, and placed on the chest for 15 to 20 minutes. The burning sensation on the skin was the point. It brought blood to the surface, increased circulation to the lung tissue beneath, broke up congestion, and induced coughing that cleared the airways. Every grandmother in Depression-era America had a mustard plaster recipe memorized the way later generations memorized phone numbers. Mustard contains allyl isothiocyanate, a compound that causes the vasodilation and circulatory response responsible for the treatment's effectiveness. Applied correctly, never directly on the skin, always on a cloth, and never for more than 20 minutes, it was safe and highly effective for the bronchitis and early pneumonia that killed Depression-era children who could not get to a hospital. Number 11. Depression-era families who had access to rural land and the knowledge to use it kept echinacea tincture in a dark bottle for the first sign of a cold or infection coming on. A dropper in water at the very first scratch in the throat. The knowledge had been passed down from the generation that watched eclectic physicians prescribe it routinely before the pharmaceutical lobby displaced botanical medicine from official practice in the 1930s. Echinacea was removed from the official United States Pharmacopoeia in 1936, precisely as Depression families who could not afford pharmaceutical replacements needed it most. A 2015 meta-analysis reviewing 24 randomized controlled trials found echinacea preparations reduced cold incidence by 58% and cut duration by 1.4 days. For a Depression family, where a sick parent meant lost wages, that meant hungry children. Cutting a cold short by a day and a half was not a minor benefit. It was survival arithmetic. Here is what happened to most of the knowledge on this list. The post-war economic boom that began in 1945 put pharmaceutical products within reach of ordinary American families for the first time. By the early 1950s, a doctor visit cost $3 or $4 instead of $2, but wages had risen to match. Pharmaceutical advertising convinced a generation of parents that plant medicine was what poor people used because they had no choice, and that real medicine came in a box from a drugstore. The message was reinforced by physicians who had been trained in pharmaceutical medicine and had no education in botanical alternatives. Within one generation, knowledge that had kept millions of Americans alive through the worst economic catastrophe in the country's history was reclassified as backwardness. The people who held it were encouraged to be embarrassed by it. Most of them were. The knowledge they stopped teaching is what you are listening to right now. Number 10. Willow bark tea, a natural aspirin source. Before a family spent the dime it took to buy aspirin at the corner drugstore in 1933. And since many depression families could not spare a dime for medicine, they stripped a length of willow bark from the tree by the creek and brewed it into a bitter tea that killed pain and reduced fever, reliably and for free. The aspirin that cost a dime contained salicylic acid synthesized from exactly the same salicylate chemistry found in willow bark. Bayer had patented the synthesis in 1897. The families boiling bark by the creek were using the original. A 1994 review in the British Journal of Rheumatology found standardized willow bark extract as effective as pharmaceutical aspirin for pain and fever reduction. The depression mother who did not have 10 cents for aspirin and brewed willow bark instead was not making a poor substitute. She was using the source compound. Number 9. Yarrow. Depression-era families living in rural areas where accidents were common and hospitals were distant kept dried yarrow the way later generations kept a first aid kit. When a farm tool slipped and opened a deep cut, when a child fell and hit something sharp, when a wound bled freely and a doctor was not a realistic option, dried yarrow leaves were pressed hard into the wound and held there. The bleeding slowed. The plant contains a choline, which directly activates platelet aggregation, the body's blood clotting response. A 2021 clinical trial in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed yarrow compresses reduced wound bleeding time by 47%. During the Depression years, when emergency room visits were impossible for most families and blood loss from farm injuries killed men and women who would have survived with modern care, yarrow was not an alternative to treatment. It was the treatment. Number 8. Blackstrap molasses. This was the Depression-era iron supplement for families whose diet had been stripped to the cheapest possible foods. A jar of blackstrap molasses cost 10 cents and lasted weeks. A tablespoon a day, given to children who were pale and listless, to pregnant women in their second trimester, and to anyone showing the slow fatigue and brittleness of iron deficiency anemia. Blackstrap molasses, the byproduct of the sugar refining process, contains significant concentrations of iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. A single tablespoon delivers approximately 3.5 milligrams of iron, nearly 20% of the daily requirement. For depression families living on cornbread, beans, and little else, blackstrap molasses was the nutritional supplement that kept the most vulnerable family members from sliding into the deficiency diseases that killed children in the hardest years. It was 10 cents. It worked. It still works. Number 7. Fire cider. This remedy sells for $22 a bottle in health food stores today. Depression-era families made it in a barn. They packed raw garlic, onion, horseradish root, hot peppers, and ginger into a mason jar and covered it with apple cider vinegar. The jar sat in a cool, dark place for 4 to 6 weeks, shaken whenever someone walked past it. At the first sign of a cold, A tablespoon was taken. Adults grimaced, children gagged. The combination of allicin from garlic, capsaicin from peppers, acetic acid from the vinegar, and the volatile compounds from horseradish and ginger created a genuine antimicrobial and circulatory stimulant that worked fast enough to be convincing. Depression-era families made fire cider because the individual ingredients were cheap enough to afford even in the hardest years. A head of garlic, an onion, a piece of horseradish from the garden, and the gallon jug of vinegar that every household kept for everything. The entire preparation cost under 25 cents. Number 6. Lemon and honey. The combination that Depression-era mothers gave for sore throats, colds, and the respiratory infections that move through neighborhoods in winter cost almost nothing and did more pharmacological work than most people realized. Honey has confirmed antimicrobial properties. The hydrogen peroxide it generates in the throat kills bacteria on contact. A 2007 study in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine found honey more effective than dextromethorphan, the active ingredient in most cough medicines for nighttime cough in children. Lemon juice creates an acidic environment hostile to bacterial growth while delivering vitamin C, which the Depression-era diet was chronically short of. A lemon cost 2 cents in 1933. A jar of honey cost 15 cents and lasted months. Combined in hot water, the preparation worked on 3 separate mechanisms at once: antimicrobial, antitussive, and nutritional. The Depression mother, who gave it to a sick child, was practicing rational pharmacology with what she could afford. Number 5. Slippery elm. The powdered inner bark of the slippery elm tree was one of the most trusted remedies in every Depression-era household that knew about it. Mixed with hot water, it formed a thick, mucilaginous gel that coated the stomach and esophageal lining completely, soothing ulcers, acid reflux, and the chronic stomach pain that came with the anxiety and poor nutrition of Depression life. It was also made into a gruel, thin, bland, nearly tasteless, and given to infants who could not keep food down, and to elderly relatives whose digestive systems had given up on heavier food. Slippery elm was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1820 through 1960. The FDA classified it as a Category 1 safe and effective demulcent in 1986. A small bag of the dried powder cost 5 cents and lasted through dozens of uses. Depression families who kept it on the shelf were using an officially recognized pharmaceutical agent that remained in the official pharmacopoeia for 140 years. Number 4. Pine tar soap. Depression-era families fighting the skin infections, ringworm, impetigo, and scabies that spread rapidly in crowded households with limited access to clean water reached for pine tar soap as their primary antiseptic. A bar cost 3 cents, and it lasted weeks. Pine tar contains phenolic compounds with broad antimicrobial and antifungal properties. Dermatologists used coal tar and pine tar preparations for skin conditions throughout the first half of the 20th century, and pine tar shampoo and soap remain available and recommended by dermatologists for psoriasis and seborrheic dermatitis today. Families during the Depression who used pine tar soap on infected skin and on children with ringworm were using a medically appropriate topical antimicrobial agent that was within their budget precisely because it had not yet been rebranded as a specialty dermatological product. The same chemistry is still in the products on the pharmacy shelf, only the price has changed. Number 3. Mullein leaf tea for tuberculosis. This requires honesty. Tuberculosis killed more Americans during the Depression than any other infectious disease. In 1933, tuberculosis mortality was 68 per 100,000 Americans. Treatment required sanatorium care that most families could not afford. Mullein leaf tea did not cure tuberculosis. Nothing available to Depression-era families cured tuberculosis. What mullein leaf tea did was measurably reduce the severity of the cough, the symptom that exhausted tuberculosis patients, spread the disease, and made sleep impossible. Mothers of tuberculosis patients brewed mullein constantly. It kept their people comfortable when comfort was all that was possible. Verbascoside in mullein suppresses inflammatory enzymes in respiratory tissue. Germany's Commission E officially approves mullein for respiratory catarrh today. For Depression-era families watching tuberculosis take a family member they could not get to a sanatorium, mullein tea was not a cure. It was mercy, administered as medicine. Number 2. Salt and vinegar gargle. The Depression-era treatment for strep throat in households that could not pay a doctor $2 for the penicillin that did not yet exist for civilians was a gargle of warm water, salt, and vinegar used every 2 hours through the day. Salt creates an osmotic environment that dehydrates bacterial cells on contact. Vinegar's acetic acid kills a broad spectrum of bacteria, including Streptococcus pyogenes, the pathogen responsible for strep throat. A study in 2010 in the Journal of Food Protection confirmed that dilute acetic acid solutions effectively kill Streptococcus species within minutes of contact. Depression families who gargled every 2 hours with salt and vinegar were delivering a genuine bactericidal treatment to the infected tissue. Many of them recovered without the complications of rheumatic fever and kidney damage that untreated strep can cause. Not because they were lucky, because salt and vinegar at adequate concentration actually kills the bacteria. Number 1. Black cohosh for women's health during the Depression. Depression-era women faced the full burden of inadequate health care with particular severity. Gynecological conditions, including menstrual disorders, the symptoms of menopause, and complications of difficult pregnancies required a doctor visit women could not afford. Black cohosh grew in shaded woodland edges across the American South, Appalachia, and the Midwest. A woman who knew where it grew and how to prepare it shared that knowledge with every woman in her community who needed it. A tincture of the dried root taken daily addressed menstrual irregularity, reduced cramping, and eased the hot flashes and sleep disruption of menopause. Today, black cohosh extract is the best-selling herbal supplement for menopausal symptoms in the United States, and clinical trials have confirmed its effectiveness. A bottle sells for $18 at the drugstore, while Depression-era women found it in the woods and paid nothing. What they knew is what we pay for now. 25 cures, made from what poor American families could find in the garden, the creek bank, the kitchen cabinet, and the general store when they had 3 cents to spend. These were not the remedies of ignorant people. They were the pharmacology of people who had to be right, because they could not afford to be wrong. The clinical literature has spent the last 40 years confirming, one study at a time, that a significant percentage of what those Depression-era grandmothers knew was pharmacologically accurate. They did not have the vocabulary for the mechanisms. They had the results, and they needed those results to work. Ask someone in your family who remembers the Depression what their grandmother used when someone got sick. Write it down. That knowledge is one generation from silence. Subscribe to Forgotten American Ways. We are going to keep bringing it back.